part of the Dare to Decide Launch VIP experience conversations as part of the launch of my book that is going to be released July 23rd. Dare to Decide, Discovering, here we go, Discovering Peace, Clarity, and Courage at Life's Crossroads. And so this is one of our conversations. What if you dare to believe you aren't too young, too old, too unqualified, too shy, too reserved? That was one of mine. To something to start your dream. And so that's even part of the topic of this book. And so Tyler,
Hey.
How old were you? You wrote your book, The Jewels of Fate, which I read. I forgot to bring it up here. And there it's behind your shoulder there. So you wrote that when you were 17.
Yes.
That is correct. And so you told me you've been writing and reading stories since childhood. You started writing creatively at the age of 7 and worked on it. Well, that you beat me. I was about 13 when I wrote my book, and I punched my mom typed it out for me, and that was when we first got our Commodore 64 computer, and I put a needle through the pages to make my own binding, put a little yarn, and so I was 13. So it looks like you're a little ahead on me in that 7, and you worked on this book for 5 years as a teenager. Wow.
Grade 7.
Grade 7. That's amazing. So tell us a little bit about your book.
So it is called The Jewels of Fate, and it is a fantasy novel, and my target audience is between 13 to 18, but personally I feel that anyone can read it and enjoy it. Hopefully, that's the intention. And it's about this boy named Chuck, and he learns that he has magic powers, and he is supposedly the only one who can save this alternate world that he didn't even know existed from a war that has started to break out. And it's about how he travels to this world called Echinacea, and it's full of magic and creatures and quests and enemies and new people. So yeah, that's the gist of the story.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think I read that quite a few months ago, shortly after it came out. And I remember, once I was getting into it and the different characters and the different world and imagining all of these different beasts, and you wove it so tightly. It just kind of one thing happened after another. And I remember thinking, there's something's going to come up later with this character, but I don't know if it's going to be good or bad. Yeah, you kept me wondering. It was really good. So when you worked over the last 5 years, there's a whole other world, creatures, all of these things you must have had to wrap your mind around.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what it was to write that.
Well, it originally started as a short story, so back in grade 7. And slowly from there, it evolved, and I kind of added on to it. And obviously, the first draft is nothing like the final draft, and that was no different from my story. It was very, very different from what it turned out to be. And as I grew older and I got new experiences and I kind of honed in on writing as I grew older, it became more of a novel rather than just the short story. And then the final draft that I wrote of the actual story before I got into the editing took about a year, and I finished it right before Christmas of 2018. So if I hadn't started as a short story and I went right into kind of a novel, I'm guessing it would have taken about a year, but it took a lot more than that because there were so many layers that I added and took away and characters that I took out, revamped.
Yeah. So how many drafts would you say that it took you? What was that process like when you went through it all?
I would say probably, I don't know the exact number, but I'm going to guess about 10 to 12 drafts. So it was about 3 drafts for the short story. And when I say drafts, it was just me kind of writing, not really thinking about it because it wasn't really something I really wanted to pursue at that point in grade seven. It was just something I wanted to do for fun.
Mm-hmm.
And then more serious drafts came later. And then editing itself took about three drafts. So I did the plot edits, and then I did the line edits, and then I did grammar and kind of fixing up anything that didn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. And then when you came, and then so I remember when I was writing novels and the point that it would come to having to get rid of characters or something didn't make sense. What was that? What was that like to let go of pieces you had written and poured into, and then you kind of chop them from the book later and merge them?
It was hard. I mean, a part of me knew that it wasn't going to stay just because the reason I cut it out was it just didn't fit. So obviously, when I got more serious about it, the things that I didn't want to fit obviously had to go. So I that wasn't such a huge challenge for me personally, but I know a lot of people do struggle with that of
Mm-hmm.
letting go of things they've already written just because of the time and the investment they've put into it. For me, it was more about it getting better. And even though it was hard, it might have been hard initially, it became easier once I realized that the story flowed better or it connected better or it wasn't dragging. Like there were chapters where readers could have considered it boring or irrelevant to the actual story.
So you kept that vision all the way through that of it, because I can relate
Yes.
to the just you pour some yourself into something and then having to let it go and chop it out. You kept your eyes focused on what was the quality of what you wanted. You wanted a quality story. You knew what it would take to have that experience, and so that's what you focused on. That's great. That's ahead of the curve for sure. And so then how did you said you didn't actually start this out planning to get published? It was just for fun. So how did publishing kind of end up coming to being? How did that make become reality?
Well, I've known I wanted to publish it for a couple of years, but I actually didn't get that opportunity until I was in grade 11. So I was in a business class at Eden High School, and it was my business teacher, Miss Etherington, who actually showed me this summer program that the city has, and they give you a grant to start your own business. And she knew that I was working on a book, and she thought it would be a good opportunity for me, even though a lot of people don't think publishing a book as a traditional business. And honestly, I wasn't thinking that way either. But I applied and they really liked the idea and the concept. So they took me on and it was a really great experience. So I most of the money that I earned from the grant went to my marketing, which I did before the launch and after the launch. And
Mm-hmm.
then I spent a large portion of the summer editing it because I had finished the actual draft, but it was not edited at all. So I spent hours going through each chapter and kind of cleaning it up and polishing it and yeah, going over it over and over. And then at the end of the summer, I launched it at Heritage Bookstore as an ebook. The
So
paperback,
this is all in the Niagara region of
yes.
Ontario, Canada. If you're watching from somewhere else in the world, and so this is all the local Christian bookstore. They have a beautiful little setup there, a nice space to come in. Yeah.
Mhm. So that was a lot of fun. But because of the timeline and the way the program worked, I could only release the ebook at the end of the summer. And then after Christmas this year, in March, I released the actual paperback, which was super exciting because
Mm-hmm.
as much as
And
I,
then COVID happened, right when you
yeah,
were going to have your lunch
yeah,
party.
yeah, actually, yeah, COVID did cancel my launch party, but that's okay because it's going to be rescheduled someday and I'm not
Yeah,
worried
still
about
out
that.
there. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And I got to bring it to school because I had some people who wanted to purchase it there, and then COVID hit. So that was kind of a curveball, but I'm working through that.
That's awesome. And so going through that, the writing process, the realizing, wow, this actually could be a published book, and then thinking, wow, this could actually be a business, and then all of the the time crunch with the publishing, in all of that, what would you say your biggest challenge was, or your biggest fear that popped up through all of that?
Definitely the thought that I don't know if I'm capable of publishing a book or even writing a book just because of my age. And I think that stemmed from the fact that I did write this story as a short story for fun and kind of just wasn't really thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it just kind of evolved naturally, but at the same time, I always had these doubts that I don't know if I can publish it. I don't know if I can market it. I don't know if I can even finish it or if it's good enough quality for other people to read, just because if I didn't have enough experience or haven't even read enough books.
Right. So that is an interesting concept. You said you just kept moving forward, but the fear kept popping up all the way through. So what kept you going? Even though the fear would pop up, some people would just say, oh, like I'm going to listen to that fear and maybe it's right and I am too young or too inexperienced. What kept you going?
Well, that's interesting because I'll admit, over the 5 years that I worked on this book, there were certain periods where I would kind of let it go for a while because I got distracted with other things. And I feel like that was rooted in the fact that I thought, okay, I don't know if I can publish this novel, so I'm going to focus my attention on something that I know I can do at my age. So that's how I got distracted very easily. But
Mm-hmm.
when I did come back to it, it was because I just knew I wanted to publish a book eventually, and I wanted to finish a book. And it was kind of the realization that, well, if I can't do this now, then what if this happens when I'm, older and I have a full-time job or some other major commitment that's taking up my time that is kind of a good enough reason to stop writing and kind of focus on something more realistic.
Mm-hmm. That's actually good. My reasoning when I was about 17 was the opposite, actually. I was thinking, okay, I don't know how to do this utopia world that I was creating, and because I had series like characters mapped on, it wasn't fantasy, but I had the world and the characters all mapped out,
Right.
and and then I got a job, and all of a sudden I quickly stepped into adulthood, and I was like, I don't know how to do like real life and this dream world at the same time. So my reasoning was someday when I'm like middle aged and I have 4 kids and I'm like sitting at home, I'm gonna have lots of time to write and publish books. So I'm gonna leave it till then. And then about 4 years ago, I started. That memory. I even could picture exactly where I was sitting when I was thinking it, and I was like, wait a minute, that's right now. And I do not have 4 kids, but I everything just was twisted and I was laughing like, what was I thinking? And then it clicked, this dream isn't going to happen on its own, and I guess I better do something about it, because I knew if I end up dying one day and don't have a book written or published, because that was a dream for so long, then that's going to be a regret for the rest of my life. And that is how Dare to Decide got started.
That's
So
awesome.
kudos to you. Yeah, kudos to you for actually deciding that I'm going to do this now because this is my opportunity. And it sounds like that was a bigger drive than the fear and the wondering, what if it's not good enough?
Yeah, for sure. It was yeah, it I didn't know how everything was going to play out. I just knew what I wanted the end result to be, and that's what kept me trucking forward.
That's awesome. And even when you pictured a book finished, so you can picture and it doesn't have to be a book, it can be any dream. You kind of have an idea, this is what it's going to look like when I arrive at this point. The difference is that it doesn't always look that way, because you can only see so far. Things only turn out the way you think. But here you are, you've written a book, and now that you've written the book, and you kind of reach this destination, what other opportunities, what kind of different outlook do you have on life? How do you see opportunities? How do you see just a different outlook on life because you've written the book now?
Well, I had the opportunity to do a online webinar for the DSBN a few months ago,
So for the
and
local school
it,
board, yeah, yeah.
yep,
Well,
and
that's
it was
great.
on how to build an engaging fictional world, and I used a lot of examples from my book and then other books, and it was really meant to kind of help people build their fictional world because I know some people struggle with that, and that's not a strong point in the writing world. So I was super excited to do that, and I did not know that I could talk for an hour. That was a huge surprise for me, but I did. And
That's
then
awesome.
I had the opportunity to actually market it as a class project. So in grade 12 in English, one of the
Mhm.
major projects that we do is called the Passion Project, which is anything that you kind of want to pursue. Now you have the time to do it because it's a class project. So I chose marketing my book, and that's actually how the webinar happened through a series of events. So I was super grateful and excited for that. And I sold some books to Heritage, the where I had my launch and hopefully my paperback launch. So it's on the bookshelf somewhere in their store, and that was really, really cool to hear.
That's awesome. It just, there's something about seeing a physical copy of a book with your name on it on a shelf. It's amazing. Or
Yeah,
on an
and
Amazon cart or anything like that. That's cool. Not all dreams have your name plastered all over it. And that's what's neat about books. But when it's there's an accolade or there's a recognition of just saying this is a tangible thing that I completed. It's for display and people can want it. It's awesome.
for
I'm so
me,
excited.
for me, I just wanted it to be on someone else's bookshelf that wasn't my own. That was kind of
Yes.
my vision.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So, how about, I mean, people are wondering, yeah, well, if he was doubting if he's good enough to write a book, like, I don't know, is it? So, if people are watching now, or say, hey, if you are watching the replay, just hit replay in the comments. We would love to know that. But say they're wondering, how do I get my kid off the screens this summer? You know, maybe your book would do the trick. And I have heard of some reports of kids who have done that, and they're actually asking when your second book is coming out because they're
Yeah.
wanting it for their birthday. Um, do you have another one in mind? What's next after this?
Yes, so this book is the first in a series. I'm planning on making it a trilogy. And yes, I'm working on the second book. It will be a little bit longer than expected, but that's okay. But I'm getting working on that, and I'm super excited about it. I did find it harder to kind of build off the first book, and that was one of the challenges in this new one. But beyond that, I am thinking about a prequel series for this world, um, and then maybe even a sequel series. Just a lot of different ways to write about the same kind of universe is what I had in mind. And then I've also considered maybe going down the road of children's books. And I also want to eventually have the Jewels of Fate made into a movie. That would be so cool.
Okay.
So that's what I'm considering.
That's awesome. So you're dreaming big. So one dream, and this again doesn't apply to just reading, but when you're dreaming and you actually take one and you get one step forward and you hit a milestone like publishing the book, all of a sudden it opens up these more ideas of, oh, well then maybe this could be possible and maybe this could be possible. So yeah, it sounds like you're on a roll. Well, would you mind reading us an excerpt of the book? Maybe
For
we'll get
sure.
someone else's attention and see, hey, actually, maybe that sounds pretty good.
So I will read the first page or so.
Okay.
So I nearly witnessed the end of the world. All New Yorkers had been going about their regular routines with no idea what had really happened, but I knew the truth and how it all began. I live in New York. My family owns a luxurious penthouse and has lots of money. We can literally buy whatever we want, but life is not as glamorous as it might seem. First, I have to deal with people treating me as if I'm an arrogant snob everywhere I go. Second, my father, the big money maker, is hardly ever around. I think he sleeps at his office most days. It used to bother me that he was always gone, but it barely phases me now. Third, and what annoys me the most, is when my father finally gets home, he usually nags me about my grades and working harder at school. He plans for me to go to Harvard and eventually take over his billion-dollar company, Kingsley Enterprises. This is why Dad enrolled me in a private school called Richmond Heights and has such high expectations all the time. That was my life until 2 years ago when Gail came to live with us. I didn't know why, but one day my parents announced we would be hiring a live in maid. Surprisingly, she looked well into her senior years. Although her graying brown hair was an indication of her age, Gail was fast as lightning in the kitchen. She was a little overprotective most of the time, except when she cooked me whatever I asked for. Gail was the only person who had the guts to negotiate with or stand up to both my parents. Honestly, sometimes I felt like she was the only one who actually cared about me. There was always a massive pile of chocolate chip pancakes waiting for me on the table each morning, and today was no different. When I entered the kitchen for breakfast, Gail smiled at me and she continued to dry dishes. My mother was drinking coffee while watching the news on her plasma screen TV. Dad not here? I asked innocently, looking around for him. What a surprise. Mom glared at me, then returned her attention back to the TV. I sat down and dove into Gail's chocolate pancakes. Gail, did you hear about the kidnapping that happened yesterday? Mom asked her casually. It's all over the news. Gail gingerly set down the plate she was drying. I heard rumors from the neighbors, Gail responded. A 14-year-old from the Upper East Side was kidnapped right outside a mall. That got my attention. I was from the Upper East Side of New York. Yes, and another one happened last night, Mom explained, motioning to the TV. A 15-year-old girl named Michaela Carmenson. I met this girl's parents at a publicity event once. My mom's a publicist, so occasionally I get to meet a famous actor or two. Those poor kids, Gail murmured while watching the TV. A reporter was talking in the middle of an alley, evidently the scene of the crime. Tons of police tape was everywhere, and I could see graffiti on the walls. Why anybody would be in that area alone was beyond me. I tend to avoid those sketchy areas.
It's awesome. All right. So you get going right at the beginning of the book. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Tyler, thank you so much. And I want to close by just asking you, what would you have to say to someone who is holding back on a dream that they have, or just something that they would love to pursue? And there's one of those, I'm too young, or I'm too inexperienced. Who's going to pay attention to me? Is this going to be good enough? Is this even needed? What would you say to that person who's watching today?
I would say, whatever the situation is, if they have that mentality, to really think about where it came from. And if they're thinking, I am to whatever to pursue this, then think about if someone actually said that to you physically, or if maybe it's just something that you came up with yourself. And if somebody did say something like that, like you're too young, you're too small, you're too whatever, then think about how that person really impacts your life and whether you really want to be listening to them in the first place. Because for me, I found that a lot of people were super supportive, and I want to thank everyone who read my book and has given feedback. It's you guys are amazing, but the support system is great, and really kind of look for those people who will support you. Obviously, constructive criticism is important, but really kind of drive you and push you and motivate you and kind of break those ideas that you may be coming up with yourself.
It's awesome. In my book, I call them dare to decide friends. They're the ones
Yeah,
that
exactly.
they see the best in you, and they are the ones that are going to pull you. And I don't know, there's about 8 of them that I list, different roles of people that you need alongside to push your dream forward. You can't do it
Exactly.
without it, because yeah, our brains do funny things. And so these people come alongside and help push. I don't think there's a self-made dream. We underestimate the support that we get
Oh
from.
yeah. I've had people every step of the way really pushing me, and now that kind of I've arrived at the destination, it's it's really made me kind of look back and kind of want to help other people along this journey too, just because like I've had so much support in my life.
All right. Well, thanks so much for sharing today.
No problem. Thank you for
I
having me.
appreciate it. Yes. All right. Well, if you enjoyed this, tag someone who you think would be inspired by it, someone who needs a young adult fiction book to read this summer. You can pick that up at snurestories.com. They'll give you links where you can find it. You can learn more about Tyler and his work. And you can also find it on Amazon or locally in the Niagara region, Heritage Bookstore. And drop Tyler a line, leave a comment, let us know if you read it. And we loved having you.
Thank you
Thank
for having
you,
me. I'm
Tyler.
excited to read your book.
Yeah, I'm excited to read my book too. I haven't held it in my hands yet. So I
Ooh,
love that you get to hold yours. All right. Take care, everybody.
bye.